Hello, my name is Shaggy Sater, but you can call me Shaggy for short. I'm going to recount a story of mine that I tell rarely. My own family don't even know about this, and while that might sound weird to you, trust me, it makes more sense to tell internet strangers than the people I'm forced to be around. This happened when I was much younger. I'd have to ask my parents when the camping trip happened to tell you how many years ago it was, but I can assure you it was at least a decade. Now I'm going to use some questionable words for describing the location. Words like wooded and wilderness reserve, because I don't know the best words for this thing. Around a decade ago, a friend from church asked me to join his family on a camping trip to a wilderness reserve called Oasis State Park. Of course, since this was my best friend and his family had always been nice, I said yes. Up until that point, I had only camped rarely, so the prospect of camping with a friend and his family seemed amazing. We began preparing for a weekend when I wasn't busy. I got my own tent, my own sleeping bag, and my own supplies. Once all that was gathered, the father of the friend came and picked me up and my parents waved me off. There are quite a few things I remember from that trip. The amazingly hostile yet beautiful New Mexico countryside, the plateaus, and the campsite. The New Mexican wilderness isn't something a lot of people fantasize about camping in, at least not so far as I know. But Oasis State Park is different. The camping plots are all nice even if the best is always taken. There's a pretty lake, lots of wildlife, and I hate to admit, more trees than I've ever seen in town. Yeah, I know nobody thinks of multitudes of trees when they think of New Mexico, and for good reason. They aren't the most common occurrence in the plains unless planted by people. Regardless, Oasis has enough for me to just use the term woods for the sake of brevity. So anyways, we found ourselves a plot and began setting up our tents. By afternoon, the tents were set and me and my friend ditched his, oh so boring, younger sister in favor of exploring the park. The memories are fantastic. We found a snake by the lake and watched it drink from the water before slithering off quickly. We explored a place I remember was very sandy. We watched a roadrunner doing its thing. We played all day after lunch and saw so many amazing things that by the end of the day, I never would have thought anything could go wrong. We finished the day like you always do, by collecting sticks and starting a fire to eat s'mores and tell ghost stories. None of the stories were scary, probably because me and my friend were kids and his sister were an even younger child. That and his father was the lead singer at our church, and making children cry was bad for reputation. So, by ghost stories, I mean little jokes of stories designed to make us giggle more than cry. Yeah, it was lame, but what do you expect? Anyways, shortly after the stories were said and s'mores were eaten, we retired, me to my tent and my friend, his father and his sister to their tent. Now for this setup, I'll explain positioning. This is all going to be important. My tent was at one edge of the plot and my friend's tent was at the exact opposite. This was for privacy reasons. Now at my end of the plot was a mini trail that led through thick brush to the lake. Also about 3 feet from my tent was a little tree. I don't know what kind of tree it was, but it was still young and small. The trail to the lake was to the left of my tent entrance. The lake was behind it, and a thin tree line sat across the trail in front of my tent. That trail in front of my tent led to the bathrooms. So, I went to bed without a single bit of fear, and before I did, I went ahead and urinated on the tree outside my tent because of laziness. Screw the 2-minute walk to the bathrooms when nature's toilet was right outside my tent. So I finished closing up my tent for the night and climbed into my sleeping bag to go to bed. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke, I had to use the bathroom, and it wasn't the kind of pottying I could do on a tree, or at least not reasonably. So, I, not being a moron who'd wander through the dark, grabbed my little lantern. I flipped on my LED lantern and I unzipped the inner flap of my tent before the outer, as if that little nylon net could protect me from what I was about to see. Now I should mention that outside of cities in New Mexico, it's quite common to hear coyote howls. It's a nightly occurrence when camping. Heck, even up in a little village like Logan, you can hear the howls from your bedroom. It isn't so unnerving when you're in a house, but when you got some flimsy nylon walls to protect you, and that's it, well, it isn't the most comforting sound. As I unzipped my tent flap, I did hear a few howls, but they were distant and not worrying. What stunned me into stillness was a very loud howl from the direction of the lake, but a yard from my tent at most. This howl was different though. It had the feel of a coyote howl, but it was deeper, and it lasted longer. I simply sat there petrified at what I heard. I wouldn't be able to guess at how long I sat there, breathing hard, with my fingers still grasping the zipper. But however long it may have been, was just long enough for the thing that made that howl to come up the trail next to my tent. Suddenly, I heard the crunching of claws on dirt, and after that, claws on the rocks that made our camping plots. Then I saw the largest shadow made by a living creature that a little kid like me had ever seen. It lumbered heavily in the direction of the sparse tree line, where I assumed the other howling had come from. But before it got past the tree I urinated on, it stopped. I realized only then that I was both lit like a candle and had not been trying to silence my heavy breathing. By then, it was too late as that hulking thing lumbered over closer to the tree and into the light of my lantern. As dim as the little LED light was at that distance, it was just barely enough to make out details. I'd like to note a few very important details that stuck out to me as odd. It had roughly the fur coloring of a coyote, but that classic Dogman head shape with the tiny pointed ears too small to make sense. It also made strange noises as it lowered to all fours in front of my tent, popping sounds like joints rubbing together, as I can only assume its knees busted out of their standing joints and fell into different joints to support all fours. It briefly ignored the very obviously frightened kid, me in my tent, as it sniffed the tree I had urinated on. The breaths were like a dog's, but longer, and far deeper, almost like a horse. Then that thing turned to me and stared straight into my eyes. Its eyes didn't glow. They didn't peer into my soul, but they were unbelievably unnatural. Above all the things I saw in those eyes, I saw a predator. Have you ever been in a position where you made eye contact with a beast you know is stronger than you? Something you know you could just slaughter you, and you know it knows you know. Just looking for seemingly so damn long that I thought for sure I'd just be a bloody stain by the time anyone reached my tent. Screaming would do nothing. I doubted a gun even would hurt this thing. But despite every feeling in my gut, despite the dread of knowing it was a predator and I was prey, I didn't die. Instead it turned, slowly, ever so slowly, and just fucking sprinted off into the woods, just fucking gone into the night faster than it came. I have one personal friend who knows, and he jokes that it was my piss on that tree that made it run away. Like I marked my territory or something dumb like that. Or maybe it just wasn't hungry, or, most improbable, it had just enough morals to not kill a kid. I'll never really know. Needless to say, I didn't go to the bathroom. I just put my lantern away, closed my tent flap, and held it all night. I don't remember sleeping that night. I might have, I might not. But if I did, it was dreamless. I do remember that I tried to hide this experience the next day, asking if my friend and his family heard any howling. While they did hear the howling, They told me they just ignored it, thinking it was a coyote doing coyote stuff. I was encouraged to just ignore it, as if I was a city kid who had never heard coyote howling before. That next day, I stayed as close to my friend as possible while exploring, and had nearly forgotten the encounter by lunch. Somehow, the safety I had been feeling during the day put the beast out of my mind, until we found tracks in that super sandy place. Coyote tracks. I think seeing those tracks confirmed to me that it wasn't just some dream, and because of that I showed enough fear that night to convince my friend's family to let me sleep in their tent. Even in the comfort of a warmer tent, more people mean more warmth, and in the presence of an adult, the father, and 2 other people, a friend and his sister, I couldn't sleep that night. I nearly drifted to sleep, and then I'd hear a coyote howl. The next day I pretended to be sick and got my mother to drive up and take me home a day or 2 early. Worst camping trip of my life. It ruined not only my whole summer, but also ruined camping. I haven't been camping without a tent buddy since, and I don't plan to. Even then, I'm never comfortable. Always listening for strange noises and acting paranoid. This really fucked me up, I guess. Being forced to see that a human, top of the food chain, is utterly powerless in front of such a beast. Seriously, I don't think I can press hard enough to make everyone realize how powerless I felt. Even today when I think about this, I remember 2 things first. Those eyes, and that feeling. Just writing this sent multiple shivers up my spine. That said, you might be asking why I'm talking about this again, if it terrifies me so much. Simple. I both want answers, and I want to add to the conversation. I feel the need to add this encounter so that others can experience it. Maybe contact me with questions or answers. So let me say now that if you have any idea what happened that night, please respond or DM. If you have any questions, go ahead and do the same.